I'll be yours, just thank you. Uncle Bill, 20 years in the city business, and you haven't changed a bit. Even though you had to take their shit. From these GMs, they're all actually GMs, yes, thanks for the memories of Tommy and the bird, and yes, those floating birds. And now that we think of it, you're gentle as we were, I fuck you, asshole.
Well, that's a different beginning to a memorial service. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Arlene Bump. I serve as the senior minister here at this Fort Lauderdale Center for Spiritual Living. It's a privilege for me to officiate at this important event. We're here to experience together a memorial service and not a funeral. This is not a religious ceremony. It's a reflection on the celebration of eternal life, as we are here to celebrate the life of Neal Rogers and not to mourn his death. The purpose of the memorial is to commit to memory the uniqueness and spirit of your friend. We honor Neal, who many of you have known as a colleague, and those who have had the privilege, a true friend in every sense of the word. I read to you now a writing from John Gillespie Magee. Perhaps some of you may recall it. It's entitled High Flight. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced on skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. I've wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, where never a lark or even an eagle flew. And, while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, I put out my hand and touched eternity. A wise and quotable Benjamin Franklin had this to say about death. We are spirits, that bodies should be lent us, while they can afford us pleasure, assist us in acquiring knowledge or in doing good to our fellow creatures. It is kind and benevolent act of the infinite. When they become unfit for these purposes and give us pain instead of pleasure, instead of an aid, they become an encumbrance and answer none of the intentions for which they were given. It is equally kind and benevolent that a way is found by which we may get rid of them. Death is this way. Our friend and we were invited on a journey of pleasure which is to last forever. His place was ready first, and he's gone before us. We could not all conveniently start together, and why should you and I be grieved at this, since one day we will follow, and will know where to find him. Something died on December 24th. But it was not Neal. What died was the physical body, and what died was all the grief connected with such things. It died that Neal might live and live better. I want to share with you an analogy about the passage of death, the death passage. Sometimes people have confusion or conflict about thinking about death, and for many, it's about being in denial. This analogy is a very beautiful one that kind of takes care of how that might look. It's about the ship, and since it's a ship, the reference is she. I'm standing upon the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails to the morning breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength, and I stand and watch her until at length she is only a speck of white cloud, just where the sea and the sky meet and mingle with each other. Then someone at my side exclaims, "There, she is gone." Gone where? Gone from my sight, that is all. She is just as large in hull and mast and spar as she was when she left my side, and just as able to bear her load of living freight to the place of her destination. Her diminished size is in me, not her. And just at that moment, when someone at my side says, "She's gone," there are other eyes watching for her coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout. There she comes. And that is dying, simply a process into the next expression of one's soul consciousness. I suggest that the way we observe an event determines our reaction to it. At a time of bereavement and grief, we do not look for sympathy. We do not want a mental sedative to dull the pain. We want the spiritual truth to process the pain. We want to be fully alive in the moment so we may move forward through it into feelings of peace and acceptance. Just as the problems of yesterday are dissolved into answers and resolutions through a greater understanding of those problems, so the mystery of our death passage is dissolved in the awakening to our new life's expression. We're sorrowful as we watch the ship carrying our beloved into the horizon. We may suffer a personal loss, but consider this. To those who are awaiting his arrival, it is a gain, and no doubt they're having a party this very minute. At the event of a departure, we may grieve because we give no thought to that departure being only a part of the process of an arrival. We rush about in our emotions and our dreams and our feelings, searching for that which we already have and which could never be taken from us, and that is eternal life. At this time, I invite Mr. Norman Kent, you can be a doctor if you want to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Baum. Thank you for being here. We're going to start our service with a magical moment. It's somebody that you all know, Rickshaw.
Thank you, Norman. Appreciate it. I don't think that anybody else could have brought this august group together except Neal. He was definitely one of a kind. When I heard that he had passed, I shed a tear and sat down and wrote this. It's not that long, so bear with me. I've always believed the Almighty gives each of us a special talent, the ability to do something better than just about anybody else. Unfortunately, a lot of folks never cross that bridge that gets them where they want to go because they somehow never light the fuse that goes off and points them in the right direction. Neal Rogers was different. His talent was obvious. He was magnificent. He was born to say the things we all thought, but somehow we couldn't find the words to say them out loud. He found those words and he said them on the radio, and people listened. So many people that he became $1 million property in a business where the guy who's talking into the mic rarely sees $1 million of anything. Neal saw the world through different glasses. His focus would be on what the people most of us knew did wrong. Your title as mayor or president or head coach didn't mean a thing. You were just another guy or gal, and given time, Neal would find something not to like about just about anybody. His sense of humor and timing would become the icing on his cake, and since radio is the ultimate theater of the mind, timing became critical. I will never forget the day he did at least 15 seconds of dead air to make a point. 15 seconds of airtime on the Neal Rogers Show is worth a lot of money. And when you're in the car waiting for Neal to say something as close to asshole as the units will allow him to go, 15 seconds can be an eternity. And Neal knew it. Dead air on the radio was one of the loudest things you will never hear. My 50 years of broadcasting brought lots of amazing memories. I met the Beatles in the Gator Bowl in '64. Ringo Starr wanted to buy my initial ring. I got to sit in the back seat of the Blue Angels number 7 and fly an F-18 for 10 seconds. And then one day, a couple of years back, I got to meet Neal Rogers. Unlike his on-air persona, he was kind and gentle and a really nice guy. I was kind of surprised, but he understood the business and what his listeners wanted from him better than anybody else, and nobody did it better than he did. The black hole he leaves won't be filled for a while because if you're lucky, You get one Neal Rogers in your life. Fortunately, he was there, and we were too. He would roll over in his ashes if he heard me say it one more time, but I'm going to anyway. God bless Neal Rogers.
Thank you, Rick. Good luck with your wife. I know she's ill. Take care. All of us have memories of Neal, and one who has special memories for all the years he was his program director, Duff Lindsay. Would you please step forward? Oh, there you are.
It's okay, you can boo. I think Neal would have done that. You know, if Neal were here, he'd have his shortcut or 360, and when someone mentioned Duff Lindsay's name, they go, Duff Lindsay, he'd go, he's an asshole. Well, sometimes I guess he was right, but it's the most incredible ride. I've had the pleasure of working in the radio business now for almost as many years as I am old, so only 40-something, I swear. But I was programming a real fun urban contemporary radio station in Orlando called 102 Jams for Greg Reed and the Beasley Broadcast Group. And then that job sort of went away. All the stations got bought up by all the big conglomerates, and I was out of work. Greg was about to make a program director change and called me one day and asked if I would come to town and sort of just make sure that the station, you know, that everything the commercials all got done and everything got put to bed by the end of the week. And I said, of course, you're going to pay me, right? And he said, of course. So I came back to Miami. I'd originally been in Miami before Orlando, and when I was here in the early going, it was pretty much just that, sort of babysitting the radio station. And one day, Greg walks into the office and he says, what do you think of the chance for us to get Neal Rogers? And he said, well, what do you think? And I was like, it took me 2 seconds to say, I think we'd be crazy not to give it a try. And those probably the most, they're pretty important words in my life. I mean, obviously I didn't have anything to do with it finally happening, but you know, my boss had asked me for an opinion, and I just looked at that and said, there is nobody bigger, nobody better that we could put on our little sports talk radio station here in Miami. So it got to be reality. I remember the first time that I met Neal was at a luncheon, or maybe it was a dinner, I'm not sure. It was at Il Molino. There's one here in Fort Lauderdale still, but there was one in, I believe, Plantation or one of those towns out west, and we all went there, and of course Greg was there, and I was there, and Norm was there, and Neal was there, and George Rodriguez, who was certainly coming over to be part of the show, and the deal had already been done by then, so this was a kind of a powwow. And, you know, I think that I went through 2 shirts on the way there just because I was so nervous of oh my goodness, this is Neal Rogers. This is a guy who, when I called back in the 80s when I was at Hot 105 and tried to do a bit on his show, told me I was a loser. Thanks, Neal. Always had a way of making me humble, all of us, really. So anyway, the dinner went well. It was, you know, it was tense, and you're looking at this guy thinking, wow, this is the real deal. He wasn't, he was fairly quiet at that dinner. If I remember correctly, George did a lot of the speaking, talking about how the show would run and the ins and outs of that. And, you know, that's what I needed to be concerned with as program director. So at the end of the night, it was a good one, and I thought, well, okay, we can get this done. Well, then he came over, and it was, overnight, the biggest thing in Miami radio in 1997. It was the biggest thing. And we went from nowhere to #1 in our male demographics and fought for that position book after book after book when Neal was on the radio station. I I think of some of the fun things that he it's you don't really program Neil Rogers, he sort of programs you. Although there are things you might have to get done, I mean, certain things. A bad day for me was when I got a call from the front office. You have to talk to Neil about and fill in the blank. And I'd be like, oh, okay, this isn't going to be a great day. So the martini was waiting at the end of the day for me at the end of that day. But all those days came full circle. Neil was, if anything, you could talk to him. It took a while, and he went on his incredibly creative rampages. But at the end of the day, you got done what you needed to get done. And if you knew you were on his side, then you were a good person as far as he was concerned, and that's why I think I wound up with him. One of my favorite things was the anthrax scare. Everybody should remember that, and packages were showing up in Boca and whatnot, and so everybody had masks and surgical gloves, and what? So, never laugh at your own jokes. It's not a joke. I opened the door. The show was going on, and when you opened the door to Neal's studio at QAM, the first studio was George's. And basically, you saw the back of George's head. And he was looking through the window with no bald spot then. And he was looking, I didn't have one either, okay? Looking through the window at Neal, and Neal could see you. So I walked in, I just opened the door, and I knew Neal could see, made eye contact with me, and I took a surgical glove, and I started to put it on like this. And then I was Duff, the program director and proctologist for the rest of the show. So I also got to be a personal friend of his, especially towards the end. At the end of my time with WQAM, I had moved over to sales, and I was really responsible for selling that show, and we had some victories along the way. Got to meet some of the people that he just loved, like the people at the Melting Pot. Lots of clients. If he liked it, oh boy, they got thousands and thousands of dollars in free advertising. But we got to be friends on a what's going on in your personal life basis. And that was maintained, through the end. So I'm going to miss him. Instead of saying so long, I'd like to say this as I finish. Hello, Neal. And if you listen, you can hear him say, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Duff. Neal loved the media. He loved attacking the media. Even when I would run into somebody and say, oh, Neal really liked you, he'd say, well, why did he say all those things about me? And I can't think of two better people than to capture the essence of Neal's impact on South Florida than two writers, one from the Sentinel, one from the Herald, that have been writing about Neal for nearly a quarter century. So the next speaker I'd like to invite up is Tom Jicha.
Thank you. I've been marveling all afternoon that being here is almost like looking at the history of Miami radio. But I also, thought struck me, sitting here listening to the wonderful tributes, that the one person who wouldn't be here today, under any circumstances, I can almost hear him saying, I wouldn't be caught dead there, is Neal Rogers. So I guess he's not missing anything because he wouldn't be here under any circumstances. I have a letter coming up in my Q&A this Sunday, and for the final time, Neal, I didn't make it up. And they wanted to know, was the hostility Neal expressed on the air for program directors and general managers and the media, was that genuine or was it just show business? And I would say that some of it was genuine, We don't have to name names, ding dong. But most of it was show business. I think the turnout today here is an indication of that. I don't see anyone that I know that Neal has not ripped unmercifully, including yours truly, Tom Jicha, or Tom Jicha. He's bald and stupid. Or like the next speaker, Ellie Brecker, who, the psychotic bitch from the Herald. But we're both here because we both understood what Neal was about, and he understood what we were about. And it was almost to be knocked by Neal it was like being called a hockey puck by Don Rickles. It meant you mattered, that you were someone, and so you took it as a compliment. And the thing about it was that Neal could, and many times it happened, and I'm sure Ellie can tell you the same thing and will, Neal would rip me unmercifully all day long over some silly little thing. And then for whatever reason, I'd have to call him in the afternoon for a story I was doing. And he'd answer the phone, and it was like nothing ever happened. It was show business most of the time. And that's how, he was someone, he understood the business. He understood my job as well as he understood his own job. He was a pro, and that's how I'll remember him.
Well, then let's hear from the psychotic bitch from the Herald.
He never called me a douchebag. He never called me an asshole. But when I was listening to the radio in the car and I heard, "Where's that psychotic bitch from the Herald?" I knew that was my cue to call Neal. And I didn't go back with him as long as a lot of you. I was assigned to write about him in 1997. And I have to tell you, I was a public radio snob. I didn't know from a Neal Rogers. I didn't know from a talk radio, nothing. And in preparation for doing the interview, of course, I had to start listening to the show, and I thought I was going to be completely either bored or grossed out. I was hysterical. Verklempt I was. When he started flinging around Yiddish, it was just the funniest thing in the world. And there are many reasons to give him credit for making people think in South Florida. And one of the things I also have to think we need to give him credit for is introducing Yiddish to, as I said in my obit, people who wouldn't know, gefilte fish from garbanzo beans. But many of us have had this same experience. I was sort of terrified when I had to interview him, and we went out to lunch at the Longhorn Steakhouse, I remember. And I thought, wait a minute. This guy is the mouth? Why doesn't he talk? And finally, but very, very, very low-key, I knew I was fine when he gave me his mother's telephone number. And I went over and I had lunch with Mildred, and she gave me Rugala. And from then on, whatever he said about me on the radio, that Yenta, Neal and I really liked each other, and I appreciated the little emails that we had after he left the air, and I appreciate the fact as a reporter that he never lied to me, and that's not something you can say about a lot of people. Anyway, Uncle Neal, I'm going to miss you. Thank you.
There's a gentleman that worked on the station Neal used to call the Light Bulb, WFTL, and then went into politics. Neal detested him as a radio talk show host on FTL. He hated him as a politician, and he insisted on speaking to be laughed at today. Ernie Soshin.
I'm not a scheduled speaker, but I've never been a scheduled anything, so that's not new for me. I just wanted to get across to all of you my experience with Neal, and something that perhaps a lot of people didn't appreciate about him. The man was a true genius. Yes, he was a clown, and yes, he called people douchebags and everything, but he had a brilliant, brilliant mind, and my wife pointed that out to me one time. I tried to do what Neal did, and unless you've tried to do what he did, you can't really appreciate how difficult it is. And I was doing a show one time, and I had a couple of callers call me and say, "Oh, those little old ladies in Hallandale are stealing the sweet and low out of the..." And I said, "I don't want to talk about this," and I blew them off the air, and I got 2 or 3 more calls, I blew them off the air. The next day, Neal went on the air, and he knew he had a hot issue. I was too stupid to see it. He knew this is something that would turn people on. He started, I don't know, he ran with that maybe 6 months. He had the mayor of Hallandale call him up to complain. That was his genius. Now, he tried, as some of you may recall, just to show you his intellect, he used to try having really high-ranking people as guests on his show. I was one of them, not one of the high-ranking people, but I used to be, that's where I started radio. And I remember one time he had George McGovern, I don't know if you remember, when he was running for office. I would have killed to have a guest like George McGovern sitting in the studio with me, and Neal didn't get 3 phone calls that day. And I think he decided at that point that is not what the people want. The people really want fun. They want to call people douchebags. They want to call people all kinds of names. They want to do things. Over the last few years, every time Neal would mention my name on the air, and by the way, I'm a sock guy, in case any of you don't know me, anytime Neal would mention my name on the air, I would get 15 phone calls. "Neal talked about you today. Neal talked about you today." The guy was genius. He was wonderful. He was smart, and he was one of the best entertainers that radio has ever known, and I truly will miss him.
In a few minutes, we're going to hear some of that art of Neal Rogers when we play a tape George Rodriguez produced with Boca Bryant. But when George Rodriguez wasn't on the air, somebody named Joe Costello was. And I'd like to hear from Joe now.
I worked with Neal from 97 to 2002, but I knew him a lot longer. I was trapped in a warehouse shrink-wrapping watercraft parts, and we had Neal on in the background. I was making like $8 an hour. I always felt like I had a pretty good line of crap. When I found that this guy was making $1 million a year, well, this is the business for me. So I got a job at a station that, sorry guys, wasn't the station I wanted to work at, 560. And no, I don't know why it worked this way, but just 6 months after I went to work there as a board operator, here comes Neal and George from 610 to 560. And I was like, oh my, thank God. Because, I don't know, I don't consider myself a hardcore sports guy. I really liked the Neal Rogers show. Well, George invited me on the show, and I began to work with these 2 guys who taught me everything I know about radio. And it was just such a great experience walking in and seeing the magic that was radio that I had just been listening to while working in hell, how it went down, how it worked, and I started to just absorb everything that I could, every piece of information. What I took from Neal and George, I remember Neal always say, keep it light. He got a call back in the day, keep it light, Neal, keep it light. But while he kept it light, he was able to attack issues that really mattered. And so while Neal was a genius and Neal was so funny and an amazing guy, I think about the issues and the way that he changed our area and me personally. Issues like tolerance. I grew up with Neal Rogers. I've never had a problem with tolerance. Whoever the hell you are, as long as you're not an asshole, you're all right with me. That's Neal Rogers. When it came to religion, Neal's religion was do no harm. As a young person trying to figure out what I think about things, am I a religious guy? Tell you what, do no harm makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. And it's a great way to look at life. And so I learned that from Neal. And so when I look back at this man's life, not only did he affect me in terms of my career, I asked him one day, I said, Neal, listen, there's a lot of things I can do. If I'm not good enough at this, please tell me now, because I'll go find something else to do. And he's like, oh, you're fine. But it is a terrible business. And he's right. It's terrible. But, and so I continue to follow the trade, and I apply the lessons that I learned from Neal about moving the show and keeping things going. But more importantly, I apply the lessons learned about life. Do no harm, tolerance. He was extremely kind to animals and people in his charity with Center One and Abandoned Pet Rescue. And those are the things that really stand out the most to me. As much as he was abrasive on the air, behind the scenes, he was a truly great person, and he will be sorely missed here in South Florida. Thank you.
The thing that made Neal, I think, most remarkable is that he knew we all had a lot more in common than we do apart. And he would make fun of our weaknesses. I'm going to try something in a minute. If you go back and play some of the sound drops at neilrogers.com, you realize that they capture the inescapable human predicaments we find in our own lives, the failings, the frailties, and how sooner or later we're all going to have egg on our face doing something somewhere, somehow. And to cheer Neal up in those last few weeks, as Tom Jicha wrote in the paper, I would take this iPad to the hospice. I would access neilrogers.com, and I would play some of the bits. And David, you remember occasionally he would grab my hand and go, the best. But I did not know all the bits that were created and what their sounds were that George might have. And this is one of them that I wound up playing. I'm going to see if it works on the mic. And we'll just test it out. I'll tell you what it is if it isn't.
New from Shine Lifeless Music. It's the song compilation that buries the competition. Come die with me. Let's die away. I sure could use some sarcophagus, 'cause I'll be dead any day. Come die with me. Let's die away. Don't miss out on the last collection of hits from Old Blue Eyes before the maggots get whipped. Stop digging a hole, 'cause I'll die any day. I'll be a cool cadaverate, new corpse. Frank Sinatra's greatest hits, the final chapter. Yes, the chairman of the board with a fond final farewell. Rigor mortis. I'll be stiffer than a tooth by Boris. Ask the Undertaker.
I had a little egg on my face.
To order, have credit card ready and call
And
800 cadaver.
instead of saying the best, he said, you son of a bitch.
It's too late. It's too late.
And I was much better off when I played the song Michael Jackson's Penis. Because Neal understood that no matter what our station or circumstance in life, that the things which are intimately most personal are in fact universally most common. So you could sneak a listen from your office to his station at 10 a.m. and be astounded to hear a host belching or talking about his hemorrhoids. And if he could make fun of himself and his own diabetes and difficulties, boy, could he ever make fun of you. And in the 4 hours that he was on the airwaves, nothing was sacrosanct or off limits. Nothing was sacred. Not the Pope or presidents, not priests or pedophiles, not fags or farts, not death or dying. I thought one of the most poignant moments on the air that I ever heard Neal talk about, because as a gay man he was often accosted and accused of, making fun about bad boys at Publix, but was there anyone who so capsulized what is wrong with pedophilia then one person actually called Neal on the air to talk about God and the religion, and he responded to them by saying, let me tell you something, young boys and girls, all you have to know about pedophilia is that if somebody ever comes up to you and says you need to pull your pants down in order to become their friends, run the hell away and find the nearest cop. And that capsulized that universal vision that he was able to articulate and share with so many people. And that enabled him to mock Michael Jackson and Bill Clinton, Michael Tyson, and Rick Sanchez. He didn't care, because he knew sooner or later, whether you heard a skit from the bridge tender to the bagpipes, he could decry stupid callers, dumb politicians, and star-studded celebrities. Larry King goes on to make millions of dollars on CNN as a national talk show host, and 25 years later, he's joking about his bankruptcy, playing clips of saying, loan me $50. And I just want to say, Larry, Neal says you still never paid it back. So whether you were the top-rated FM host on a competing station, he had no mercy and no tolerance. Sometimes he had no filter between his mind and his mouth. Like Tom said, you hated when he mentioned you on the air, but you were hurt more when he did not. Could have said over 20 years, Norm Kent, what a great lawyer. What a phenomenal agent. Scores me $1 million deal in 12 weeks in Toronto. No, and Norm's too busy playing fantasy baseball to take my call. And here's a guy who knew more about hockey and baseball than you will ever know. Here's a guy who was a phenomenal sports announcer. Here's a guy that loved sports and then went to a sports station and demeaned his callers when they called up about a sports show. Here's a guy who hated Florida and made himself the most famous Florida talk host. A guy who railed against his bosses while they paid him over $1 million a year to brutalize him. You have a guy who loved to eat, spending 25 years on the air, reminding all of us he was diabetic, too fat, needed to control his weight, and then he'd get on the phone with George and say, call up Jeff at the Pizza Loft, or get me Wayne Arnold from Royal Castle to deliver Neely burgers. And the next day we'd be doing a spot for Fit for Life diet, delivering health food to the studio that he'd tell you he was eating, and he'd tell Costello, get it the hell out of here. You have a guy who was everyone's hero because he was a blistering critic of ineptitude and apathy, incompetence and indifference, and he would rail against all that was wrong and stand up for that which was right, and we have to go back 34 years ago when it was not popular to come out of the closet like Ricky Martin or whoever did it yesterday. There's a waiting list of people to come out of the closet today. You can't even publish all the people that want to come out of the closet in the gay newspaper. You have to make a list. Neal did that 34 years ago when Anita Bryant was running people out of town. So in the same sentence that Neal would rip Janet Reno or Jesse Jackson, he wouldn't stop from making fun of himself. He was self-deprecating to a fault and honest beyond belief. And then he went home because it was just a radio show to him. But what I've learned in the last month, what I see by your presence here today, is that Neal Rogers was part of the cultural and social history of South Florida, that he's part of our life sources. As much to radio as Ann Bishop was to the news, or Brian Norcross was to Hurricane Andrew. The unabashed, unapologetic humor that he launched, those tirades each day that followed him for 30, what is it, 30, about 30, man? About 30 years from Let me hear it, let me hear it. Well, actually, it was 31 or 32, and he yelled at me for getting that wrong. But what started out as a radio show became a social institution. And that's why almost 3 weeks after his passing, we're all here today. And his caustic comments, those biting bits created by Boca Brian, who dressed up for all of us today. You know, Tom Jicha stole a little of my thunder. My first line in my written text for this eulogy was going to be that Neal couldn't be here today. He doesn't come to funerals. He didn't go to his own mother's, but who else, what other talk show in the history of America would spend a week taking calls about whether he should go to his mother's funeral? I mean, you think about the universality of it. Yes, he could deal with people's weakness, but the pain of his mother passing was much too great for him. And so he sent somebody else. I'll get to it in a minute. The point is, those soundtracks by Boca Brian were remarkable, and he might have made an exception to come to this service today, Tom. And the reason I say that is because if he saw the way Boca Brian dressed for this occasion today, he might be here. So, Boca, can I ask you just to stand up and wave to the crowd? A bald guy from Boca is now here in a dress at a gay man's wedding. Okay. And I thought I was giving the serious talk. I can't tell you how many times, and George Rodriguez can mention this later, Neal was asked to go on the news, from Channel 10 to Channel 7 to CNN to Fox News. How many times he said no? Every time. I would feel obligated. I would get a call from the Bill O'Reilly show. They want you on. No. He'd hang up on me that I intervened in a hockey game. You know, it was the same with dinners and awards and organizations. So many times people asked to honor Neal or ask him to speak or give him a stipend, and he said no, because Neal simply wanted to go home to the same house that he lived in for over 20 years, to watch a hockey game, to have a dinner at Ruth Chris, or go to a racetrack and bet on some horses, probably a little too often. He was neither an activist or an athlete. The only thing he liked to change every year was his Corvettes, which he rarely drove. He could have done satellite and gone national, but candidly, no one was offering six-figure salaries, summers and 13 weeks off with studios in Toronto and Amsterdam, so he was very comfortable where he was. Those of us in the industry who are in it now or have been in it before should also suffer, right? And yet, even 2 years after his passing, when Talkers just a month ago listed the top 50 hosts in America, Neal was on that list. And he was on that list because he was irreverent, irascible, intransigent, and at times, as you have seen, intolerable but by doing so, I believe that he pushed us all into being a little bit better. Professionally, he demanded excellence over expedience and aptitude over assholes. And occasionally, he could become a bit abusive and hostile, as we know, but when you got to know him personally, you realized that his bark was worse than his bite. Because as an individual, Neal was endlessly loyal, and the friends he has today have been friends of his for decades, from his former roommates to his accountants, attorneys, even the nice woman who cleaned his house for 25 years, the same woman. And a foolish columnist recently remarked that Neal lived with gigolos. Well, Neal, one of those gigolos is 47-year-old Jonathan Julian, who Neal has lived with for 17 years since I introduced them to each other at a hockey game for the Panthers. And that remark is an insult to them. It's also an affront to 42-year-old David Hine, who has been Neal's best friend and steady companion for over 25 years. It's also offensive to Christian Hernandez, who Neal cherished and had been devoted to for the past 3 years. That columnist made an asshole remark. When Neal remarked to others to get a life, it was usually his way of saying, stay the hell out of mine. None of us are saints, and all of us make mistakes, and Neal was no different, and you are no exception. We each create the world we live in with each and every choice we ever make. And Neal's final message to all of us, humorous though he was, is that if you are honest with yourself and stand by your convictions and there abide, the whole world will eventually come around to you. And if it does not, it is the world's problem, not yours. Neal's mistakes were out in the open for all to see, but as you witnessed his failings, so too were you privileged to witness and listen to his incredible wit, his remarkable intelligence. And I think your presence here today is testimony to the truth that you saw through to Neal's core, that you took him in as you would a member of your own family, that you miss him because he enriched your life with humor and heart, and now I'm tempted to say go out and have a knish. Because as you leave here, remember that Neal would laugh at you for being here, for wasting your time listening to me, of all people. And he would probably say, besides, it's Friday, you bastards. Because I believe that Neal would like you to listen to his radio show, to have a few laughs, to engage the day with a song in your hearts and a smile on your lips, I think I'm going to turn the ceremony over to his longtime producer and friend of 19 years, George Rodriguez, so that you, thank you, so you can hear the harmony and the banter, the passion and the rage that was Neal Rogers, the person who was a loyal friend, a devoted hockey fan, an occasional drama queen, who, like I said in a newspaper article a few weeks ago, was a gay man who became everybody's straight hero. Let me introduce George Rodriguez.
Norm Kent. Oh, hello. Norm Kent, ladies and gentlemen. Very good speech. Did they turn the sound? Just I'm here. Wow, what a bunch of ugly assholes. Last time I was in a room, I used to get $300 to be in the same room as some of you people. You know who you are. I thought some of you people were dead. Kind of wished some of the other people were dead. Yeah, oh, the guy with the eyes is here. Unbelievable. Fanny pack. If Neal were here now, you guys would have to run for the door. Don't let him catch you in the parking lot. I knew I was painting myself into a corner volunteering to speak last. I knew a lot of people would steal my thunder, and they did, and that's all right, because I think anybody in this crowd including some of the troglodytes out there, can come up and share personal experiences, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, and I was hoping that nobody would talk about that. As diverse as this crowd is, that's a nice way of saying it's a really motley crew with a lot of homeless-looking mothers out there. I really can't think of any other circumstance that I would be in the same room with some of these people, or we would be in the same room with each other. And Neal likewise, he didn't want to be bothered, and a lot of us knew that. But that's the thing, a lot of us know a lot about Neal because he was very candid on the air. He shared about his life, and that's the thing that we all have in common, despite whether or not we want to have that in common. Neal used to rail on about the South Florida community a lot. He used to call it a bedroom town, a bunch of disconnected bedroom towns, no cohesion. The irony is, he created cohesion in this community. Here we all are, thousands and thousands of people, and I mean not just everybody that's here. We've been getting a lot of emails, people listening to the tribute shows that we've been putting on. And speaking of the tribute shows, I won't waste your time with my personal experiences and what it's been like to work with Neal's short story. It was a trip, it was fun, it was exciting, but I've been going on and on the online radio show, SoFloRadio.com. Thank you. Been putting a lot of work into it, and we're really proud of it, trying to keep the spirit going, and that's what I wanted to talk about is, what now? We knew this day would come. We didn't think it would happen so soon, did we? We thought the show would go on way longer than it did, and we thought Neal's life would go on way longer than it did, and I would get emails practically daily. What are the chances Neal going to be back on? What have you heard? And nothing. He's not. He's retired. That's what Neal told me to tell everybody. He retired, and we thought he'd be tearing it up for at least another 20 years. I know I thought that. I didn't think that we'd be here so soon. Everything that we put together for the video that Boca Brian painstakingly been spending hours with all night to put together, and the tribute shows that we've been putting together, we thought we'd have more time, years to prepare. We held on to the material. I didn't think I'd be unpacking those boxes quite that quickly. But we're doing a lot of things despite Neal and in spite of Neal, like this right here that he wouldn't have been at. That was very accurate. The people that mentioned that, this is very ironic. There's a lot of irony going on right now, and that's what I want to get back to, is he created a community in a place where he didn't think there was a community, a bunch of disconnected bedroom towns. I'm very relieved, actually, to be in the presence of a lot of people I don't have to explain myself to and explain Neal to, and we've all had to do that since we found out that he was sick, and especially on Christmas Eve. I don't have to explain to you people why it wasn't a very Merry Christmas, because maybe it wasn't so merry for a lot of us. I don't have to explain what Neal meant to me, because he meant the same thing to a lot of people. There are people that got it, people that didn't get it. All of us have had to explain Neal to people and why we've been so sad. Hey, did you hear about Neal? Some people, yeah, oh, it's awful. And other people, who? And then you have to start out explaining what it is, especially to people from out of town who just don't understand. They say, oh, Howard, oh, we got somebody like that. No, you didn't. No, you never had anybody like Neal in your town. Neal. Amen. I carted that up. That's my fault. Getting ahead of me, because I was going to talk about that. Neal God, he was a religion to a lot of people, a cult following, whatever you want to call it, way bigger than a cult following by definition of that, but certainly a cult. We have our own jargon. We speak in drops. We speak Yiddish. I know Yiddish more than any 10 other Jews, and I'm not one. Because of that, you can spot a Neely. You'll be at line in the supermarket, and somebody will say something about 30. We can spot each other whether you're wearing the T-shirt, fanny pack, or not. And nobody else had it. Neal would talk about, Miami, we would talk about terrorism. What are the terrorists going to bomb? We don't have a monument. We had one. We had something that nobody else had. That was the one thing that nobody else had. And people would come in from out of town and notice that, and they would go back to their town and say, oh no, that Neal Rogers. Even Howard had to comment. People from out of town, they had to comment. That was Neal Rogers, a local phenomenon for no good reason, if you ask me. Because I think he would have flown in any other town than there's a long, complicated story about why that didn't happen. I'm stuttering, I talk for a living. But we all get it. That's the thing that we all have in common, despite how homeless some of you people look. Or how homeless some of you people are or about to be. Raise your hand if you're in foreclosure. So, I want to talk about what now, because whether or not Neal becomes a monument, whether Neal stays what we think he ought to be, a monument. There isn't a statue. There ought to be. There ought to be a statue in this town. But he's the closest thing, as far as I'm concerned. I've been down here enough. I'm always talking about Montana and other places, but I've been down here more than I've been anywhere else. And if there is a monument in this town, it isn't the Freedom Tower. I think it's Neal. I think that Neal is the one thing that more people in this town have in common than any other one thing. If there is another one thing, I'd like to know what it is. I'll go there. I'll take pictures. I got a camera. So I'd like to know what now. I know that what, a lot of people don't know how to go on. And we've all been in withdrawal for over a year now since the show went off. It changed everyone's life. It changed my life, certainly. That goes without saying. And it changed a lot of other people's lives, just judging from the emails that I've been getting. It's like a light went out. What now? What do we do now? I don't know. Some of us are going to do the only thing that we can do. Neal ruined a lot of us, and I say us. He ruined everyone out there. If you're just a listener, and I don't mean just a listener, because there's no such thing as just a listener. A lot of what Neal was a reflection of what's going on. It was an interactive show that drops the bridge tender. All of the famous bits that he was famous for were usually a result of interacting with this community. Either it was a phone call, or something happened, or he saw something, and that was the source of the material. This community was the material that Neal used to create the show that we all appreciated and we all loved. Would it have been different? Would it have been in another town? Yeah, maybe, but not as good. I mean, we got a unique set of ingredients down here, and that's what Neal used to cook with. Those are the ingredients that he baked his cake with. So you people, all you people, as unctuous as some of you are, were a huge part of the Neal Rogers Show. And what became a part of the Neal Rogers Show. And Neal Rogers isn't with us anymore, but just like my aunt, my family, we lost our nucleus. We lost the center of our family here recently. And for us to deal with that, we decided that we were going to do our best to keep it going, to take the lessons that she taught us and keep them going. And she was about the purest person that you can imagine. And we all vowed to use her as an example and carry on the kind of values that she held dear. And that's how we would keep her alive, and not just somebody that we remembered, hey, she was nice. But in that way, she could live forever. And we have the ability to do that with Neal. We have a community. We have a choice. We can go our separate ways, and each one of us remember Neal and talk about him every once in a while when we run into each other. Hey, that Neal, he sure was funny. Remember Neal? Boy, that was a good show. Or we can just use this as a beginning and take what Neal taught us and not forget the fact that we are a community. And he'd laugh at me, smack me for saying that. But he created a community in spite of himself. And I'd like to see that go on. I plan to do my best to keep it going because I don't know what else to do. He ruined me. He ruined my ability to do anything else. So this is what I'm doing, and I hope I hope we get to all do it together. I hope we see each other at the after party. Did you mention that, Norm? No problem. It's coming up after the video. A lot of contributions went into the video that Boca Brian edited together, and seriously, it was like a radio moment where it popped out of the machine and I got in the car and drove right up here. I had to overcome a lot of technical difficulties on a lot of people's ends, but a lot of people contributed things. YouTube snagged a lot of things off of YouTube, off of other people's photo galleries, pictures that people took over the years, wove it all together to make a little audiovisual presentation that we can enjoy here at the end before the after party. Boca Brian, Britt Summers, ladies and gentlemen, worked for hours, not just on the video, but going over all the old tapes, getting all the old bits, all the old segments that we've been playing on the tribute shows on SoFloRadio.com. And I'll see you people at the after party. And the guy with the eyes, and fanny pack right here, green shirt, crescent, and this guy over here. Anybody, if you draw blood, if you punch them and draw blood, I got your drinks. Okay? Thank you very much. Here's the video.
has got to stop. You make me sick, man, you bitch. How is it possible to be so stupid, Pat? You idiot, you asshole, you. Well, see this, you fat slut. I'm going to take this sword and I'm going to shove it right up his ass, okay? And I'm going to shove this thing so far up his butt that he's going to be seeing a difference back into him. What this piece of grand wheel? How sharp this damn thing is. Got 100 assholes running around this building. They can find another one besides him all kicking out in the head. Go get out of there! Go pull a cord somewhere! Go do something! Oh, what? In your case, a good question, okay? God. Don't start looking, once again, as always, plain fat old Neal, or whatever you're upset about. You disgusting, nauseating old song. Old, craggy old bitches. You know, you don't make me go off the nails on it. You don't put it out. Put it out, the others, you want it. There we go. What did I just hear you talking about with old bags? We don't want you, Liddy, okay? Go get some knitting up. Go buy some proper Go get, something.
It's more than a man. Not really, but to me, it is. I mean, you know, you have enough white guys who even take it to the station. You know what I mean? He drives me crazy sometimes, and I drive him crazy sometimes. I mean, I know he likes you, because we never like it. I mean, what would Neal say, like, my back was turned or something like that? I mean, would he like me, or wouldn't he like me? I mean, you know, what does he like a lot about me? What does he like the least about me? I mean, these are questions that burn a hole in my heart. They burn a hole in my heart. They burn me, like, to the brink of suicide, okay? I'm like, darling, Sean, I don't want to speak about it. Just let me, what's the feeling about Randy Rose? That's what he's constantly thinking about it.
As a whole, she's as round as they come. That big, beautiful Jewish nose, that's like everybody's business, I can't believe it. No, Randy's any other psychotic bitch, that's what's true. Everybody should have at least one psychotic bitch on here, and we're the lucky ones who got it. My least favorite thing about Randy is that neurotic gym that he hangs on to, man. It's just psychotic. It's like Linus with a security blanket. Sever the cord, honey. Give yourself a little distance. Do something. Send him to camp. Send him to the boys' camp. Send him to the rectory. Give him a late or something. What's this? You know down in mine. I'll tell you one thing, we better toys down right now. Okay? Let's take a vote. Think we should toys down or what? No. Come on. Let's toys down a little bit. No. God damn it. You know, the interesting part about that hysterical Julio, we got all kinds of voicemails, by the way. I'm going to play about 200 of them today. We got the niggas pissed off. You know, something pissed off gets me really fired up. And it's a great service that we have in these dog days of summer when it's 120 degrees in the shade. There ain't a goddamn thing going on in this town. I mean, it's as boring as sitting dog do. We got all this off and fired up, especially a bunch of historical ethics out there, professional ethics. But the interesting part about that one voicemail, which I'm going to play 400 or 500 times a day, is that I'm a pig, and one of the things I'm a pig about is because I talk about anal sex. That's anal sex. And this is again the self-hating fudge factors, they can't do it. And they showed several weeks ago, ancient history, but nevertheless, that the heterosexual community out there came out with a positive. And that's what has this wheel all bent out of shape. They're the ones who are coming on the show to dispelling all the old myths, that it's the fans like have the exclusive on anal sex, and they're like all hot and bothered about the human record. But I'm the pervert, I'm the bad guy, see? Because we have all these other people out there who at least if nothing else, honest enough to believe most of the Fleos, by the way, they all want, okay? Yes, sir. They are big, heavy-duty into the human vacuum for whatever reason, okay? And this guy's also hasn't been on shape, and we better tone it down. How do you like this? It's that same mentality, you know, you're going to say whatever we decide you can say. That great understanding of the First Amendment or freedom of speech, they really understand that, don't they? No. That's right, as long as, and if you tone it down a little bit, we might not go ahead and do this. You go right ahead, sir, and do whatever you have to do. You and all your group of 2 or 3 close personal friends. The Christian Coalition and the FCC, and this one and that one, and we're just sitting here peeking our pants, maybe. We don't know whether to scream or to banana. I mean, how come Catholic Church was all that other shit about that movie just because we had erotic silent priests in there? And because we had an embarrassing thing about the exorcism, which you realize there's still people that don't believe in exorcisms, you understand that, don't you? There are still people today, because of their religious upbringing and brainwashing, the fact that their mind has been turned to gel, who believe in exorcism. They're called Catholics. Oh, no. See, here you go. So he's okay with being Catholic and bad, and you have it. It's not something you can like clothes, okay, that you can take on and off. Hey, I'm actually you're that foreskin, it's not the size of the
A lot of times, even with people that speak an accent, if they think it's bad, I
understand what you're saying.
I'm not being prejudiced, I just can't
New Jersey, I just said so. Okay, yeah, New Jersey, that's one of them. Let's come up with some more of those things. We're going to try to keep fix up. What is it? No, Jersey. It's the S. No, we're not talking about the people in your family. I mean, say, how about that? You just have to tell me that when you had those phone conversations, which I got out of you cut out. You were in well, so you were in Spanish, you're not talking about that. I'm talking to people who are otherwise very articulate. I'm trying to get them to ask systems, okay? The letter X in certain words is around C. The only problem, and I don't understand it, because I can understand in some languages you have trouble trying to figure out the language because there is no such sound in that language. But azul, isn't azul a word in Spanish? Azul. Yeah, but it's still pronounced like a Z with a heart. Pronounced like an S. No, corazón. Like I said. That's why we were pronouncing Z like an S. Pronounced S like you have a 50, but that's the SH sound. Yeah, we got an SH sound. That's the one. New Jersey and the beach sheriff. Life is a beach. Miami. Well, yes, sir.
I figure, you know what I mean?
What was this in Port Hines? You're Westland Mall?
Yes, sir.
You were interested in Westland Mall, like out of the hallway, out by the statue?
Security guard.
Where were you doing this?
Right in the big room.
In the fitting room in Penny's, you were fitting it?
Yes, sir.
Did you palm your hand?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one I found bad that I was unconstitutional.
Well, unconstitutional, you have a constitutional right to jerk off in the No, you can go and yank it and was so young. But that's all that, you know, it's almost lunchtime. Have a great day. Well, he had so much stuff he was trying on. It was like a half hour. That's just the average ordinary thing to write. And you notice again, Westland. This is where everybody, all the Julios go to Westland. I mean, how they should do it at home, they should do it like they go to an adult place, like in one of their closed doors, they still have any doors on those booths. God forbid. But go to Westland. This is something new revolution. Now that package is definitely already, according to Joe, I said the package is halfway to DC by now. Thank you so much, sir. We're putting us out of business with your grotesque details. We started the day with an evening program, including almost 35 during the 2.5 hour meeting, and now sitting for 14 hours.
This couple, they're good people, and
payback?
Yeah,
The Cuban couple? 0. We paid for it.
right,
They get it for free.
yeah.
I don't think it's fair.
Do they see you as that?
Yeah, they speak real with it.
Okay, say how much an anti now. When you get to do the show and I go on vacation, you can do your professional Cuban show. That works out well. With a big pancake. Says Cesar Romero was this. I think he's right. Cesar Romero was not Cuban, okay? Cesar Romero was Cuban. Next thing they're going to be telling us that goddamn American War was Cuban too. Frank King, I think, is Cuban. No. Neil Rogers is Cuban. No. That's the last I heard. Neil Rogers was the most famous Cuban queen. That's what I heard. Who else? Tell me about let's find out Monica Lewinsky. She's Cuban. I think he was a little guacamole is not Cuban. Is that like Mexican guacamole? Other than black beans, other than black beans and rice, is there anything? Why do you do that? You do it on. And those awful stale Cuban, maybe I don't know those sandwiches. Those stale sandwiches, ESA to the north. Yeah, that's right about that. The Cubans are definitely experts on pork. So much back on this island that they're like nice, let's bring out that. Whoa, there's nothing girls, that's cool. The promotion, you can't complain about the promotional efforts of this company because there aren't any. There's a guy sitting there at Schwartz's last night. I hope he's listening. His name is John. Guy used to live in Miami. He lived in North Bay Village, like right the stone's throw from W1. Guy's sitting there eating his dinner. He likes the restaurant. Apparently he goes every now and then. And all of a sudden he comes right up to me and says, Neal, what are you doing here? And I said, it was like the first 2 minutes of the conversation didn't make any sense, and I did not understand why. And I said, well, they're putting new equipment in the studio, so we're doing a show movie here movie. And he still didn't understand. And I'm trying to explain to him. I said, well, you know, we're on over here every day, 6:20 WSFL. He said, what? You are? He's been here for a year and a half. Now, 2 days, I don't know what the date is, but a few days, it's going to be a year that we've been on here on this radio station. And you didn't even know about it. Now, do you know how many of those people are out there? Well, at least 12. So the good news is Cesar Romero, and I don't understand. And all I mentioned was that we have some old Cuban exiles over the 800, plus that one asshole who is a vacuum. They're like all our sponsors trying to give us a bunch of crap. And all of a sudden, everybody's having a chat with Cubans here today. Do we want to talk about Cubans again today? Oh, man, let's talk about Cuban invasion. We're going to talk about Cubans out loud. The good news is Cesar Romero, the Joker, was Cuban. First time how he was going, period. Hello?
Hello, Mr. Baby.
Where's Bravo? Remember that name Morgan? He was an organist, right?
No, he was a older Baptist.
First Bravo.
Yeah. You must know, you know your own, I'm sure you're
The Christian was the big hit.
Now, that was the big hit in the century, I think, around the world.
Right. But then there was a big organ in that song. The organs, right? Yeah. There you go. Everybody was Cuban. That's right. No mistake about it. Larry King's Cuban. He's a Cuban boy. Yeah. Or Hank, he's Cuban. There's Neal, Cuban. And you go back to Hank, Cuban. Every one of the lines is got it. Yeah, right. There's Neal, Cuban. Sean Durban, full Cuban. Educational show. God, we can already learn something. But you remember Patricia, that's way before your time. That was like an organ record. What's the big hit? Red Prado. Let's see, this goes back to 55. This is post that time. Oh,
Okay, let's see, how do I find this? How many ways from CC Peterson? What kind of name is that? You ever see Wilson Pickett? That's right. Fred Crowder, oh, here was your name. What's wrong with you, man? How can I forget this? Their number one that have been, of course, official with their second hit, but their biggest hit was Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White. Don't you remember that? Da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, yeah. I'm serious. That was Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom. And then there was Mr. Chef. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. TV show around. You know, they have a prescription of it. Oh, yes, they do. But do they make the prescription montage parts that they read out of this? Man, no, keep it hair in the hair. You're not going to run out of
When her batteries with ripped slugs, when they're pulling their fast joking blows, that pulls everyone home. That's just great radio, Larry King. And with that ball slapping and their Jim, the old Neal makes some hair when he rolls. When she speaks of her lows, that's just great radio. Management, they're all down to time to run in the show. So they're just a bag of Francis douchebag I know. They don't even know where to go. So when Neal gets the vision, it's just what we're pitching for us. So as we all hear the snow, obey the call. And if you have the call, walk to Neal. And I'm sure you will feel that Neal is a guy, a big, terrific cloud, just great radio.
And I have a whole new spiritual vocabulary to introduce on Sundays. Do you want to say something before I do the closing?
Stay here. Stay.
I'm not going.
We said we were going to do this on an upbeat note. I can't thank you enough, George. Welcome, Brian. This is show business. How about a hand for both of you? And that's the professional. On the other hand, for the two people that have been closest to Neal for the past 25 years, Jonathan Julian, David Hine, please stand up. I'm not going to tell you how he got the name Big Dave, but Neal met him when he was 20. After the ceremony, after Dr. Bump concludes the ceremony, those of you who want to gather and congregate and commemorate Neal even further, we're at a very weird intersection in Broward County. Right down the block is 5 points. There's like 5 intersections converge into one, so there's a guaranteed traffic jam at every day that Neal would probably make fun of. At 2345 Wilton Drive is the Manor. No free tickets if you heard the ticket lady. It's free to get in. Drinks or a cash bar. We'll be glad to hang out and commiserate with you. It's the Manor Entertainment Complex right up the block. And thank you, Dr. Bump.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to close on a more serious note. It's true. It is a memorial service, and as I've listened to all of the stories and I've listened to the things that have been on screen and have been said, it's very obvious that this was a man who represented love, and this is a man who represented authenticity. So I want to close with a reading. It is something that is as if he were speaking. I didn't change any of the words to would be his words, but you can fill in the blanks. It's entitled, "I am with you always, to those I love and to those who love me. When I am gone, release me and let me go. I have so many things to see and do. You must not tie yourself to me with too many tears. Be happy that we had our time together. I gave you my love. You could only guess how much you gave me happiness. I thank you for the love you have shown, but now it is time that I travel alone. So grieve a while for me if grieve you must, but let your grief be comforted by trust. It is only for a while that we must part, so bless the memories within your heart. I won't be far away, for life goes on. If you need me, call me in your thoughts and I'll be there. Though you can't see or touch me, I'll be there. And if you listen with all your heart, you will hear and feel my love all around you. Soft, clear, and comforting. And then, my friend, when you must come this way alone, I will be there to greet you with a smile and to welcome you home. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the truth about Neal Rogers, all the sharing, all the tears, all the laughters, all the learning, from one who totally lived from his authentic self, one who never sacrificed his personal principles, not even for a special occasion. And for this, whether he likes it or not, we are surely blessed. Thank you for being here.